Hi everyone, this lesson is going to introduce you to the cardiovascular system and take a deeper dive into blood vessels. We're going to cover the blood vessels a little bit in depth in this lecture, and then we'll go into the specific anatomy of the tissues within the blood vessels in the next lecture. And these are the vocabulary words we're going to cover as we discuss what's the purpose of the cardiovascular system and how do the blood vessels assist the cardiovascular system in its job. So this is kind of like a bag model of a human and just any organism animal. But basically the idea here is your circulatory system is truly the high-speed freeway in your body that helps circulate materials through all the different organ systems. It's going to grab nutrients from your digestive system and bring it to the blood and then help move it around all the tissues in your body. It's going to, as it moves things around your bloodstream, it's going to make sure that that blood is safe by sending it through what's called the excretory system, which includes your kidney and liver to filter your blood to make sure all the bad stuff and waste is out of it. And it's going to then give it an opportunity to exchange air, get that blood to exchange air and remove CO2 and take in oxygen so that it's going to flow all this material all around your body to feed and help protect and help remove the waste from all your cells, ultimately. And that's why the cardiovascular system is really the central expressway that helps deliver everything in your body. So, and everything your body needs to survive is aided in delivery through the circulatory system. The fuel, meaning sugar, the nutrients, the oxygen, the waste, all of that is helped transported by the cardiovascular system. Now, the cardiovascular system has a few nicknames, including circulatory system because it circulates stuff around your body, as well as the vascular system because vascular means blood, it means vessels, blood vessels in particular. So it's a huge system that consists of your blood vessels moving stuff around really quick. So the key functions in your body that is done by the cardiovascular system is it's the biggest transporter of materials through your body. And it's a high-speed way of doing it versus your lymph vessels, which do some transportation, but a much lower amount. Imagine the lymph vessels as the side streets, okay? It can get stuff around, but not nearly to the degree and speed that the freeway can. It also is the big thing for regulating your body temperature. So you'll notice when it gets cold outside, your fingers might turn white, and it's because the blood flow is leaving your fingers to maintain warmth at the core of your body, in your heart and your major organs in your torso to keep that warm, and with the neglect of the rest of your body, where like your fingers and toes you can survive without. Okay? And you'll also notice when you get really hot, you get real flushed because the blood is being pushed to the surface of your skin to help remove the heat through sweat. Okay? It also helps your immune system, as we've gone over, those white blood cells traveling through your bloodstream, as well as your lymphatic system really helps to transport things around your body. And last but not least, and it's really kind of a big one, in humans in particular, it maintains one-way flow. And that's really important because you want the garbage to leave the cells and head towards the garbage cleaning organs. You don't want that garbage to backflow back to the cells that just removed the garbage, right? We don't want the deoxygenated blood, the blood without oxygen, to flow back to organs. We want it to be removed and sent straight to the heart and then the lungs so it can be re-oxygenated, re-up that oxygen level. Okay, so that one-way flow is a really critical innovation in humans that's not found in all animals, which is what allows humans to be as complex as we are, to have oxygen-eating brains, like our brains burn a lot of oxygen to allow us to be as big as we are. Okay, so in terms of circulation and what's being transported, the big things that are being transported is nutrients and fuels. So when we say fuels, we're really meaning sugar and other food, like protein and fat, okay? Your respiratory gases, because you need oxygen to help you convert that food into energy, and you also need CO2 to be transmitted because that's the waste product that you want to remove from your body. And that's actually really critical about the CO2 levels when we talk about the respiratory system, because there's a key weird thing that's happening with the CO2 levels that is why COVID-19 patients don't realize they're sick until sometimes almost too late. Okay? It also helps move around cellular waste. So waste in your cells get to leave the cells and get into the bloodstream, where it can then be sent to the garbage dump, i.e. your liver, your kidneys, the organs that help remove the waste and get it out of your body. It also helps circulate protection. Your white blood cells and antibodies flow through your blood in addition to your lymphatic vessels to help check your body and protect you. And it goes through your blood as a high-speed freeway. And last but not least, it helps spread regulatory molecules like hormones to help communicate and trigger changes throughout all the organs in your body, right? A little gland in your kidney can send a hormone that triggers changes in many, many organs, and your muscles and your heart and lungs all throughout your body. So the biggest structures found in all the circulatory systems of all animals is the fluid that's being pumped around, the liquid, which is your blood, and it consists of liquid parts and cell parts. Your blood vessels, which are the tubes, the freeway tubes that your liquids are moving through, and then the pump that's forcing that liquid to go through your body. This is even found in organisms that are less advanced, like grasshoppers, but we have very particular blood vessels. That's why when you step on a grasshopper, everything squishes out all over the place because they don't have as advanced blood vessels. But humans, if you step on something, we might get bruised because your blood vessels leak, but your liquids don't pop out everywhere. That's a little morbid, but that's just how it is. Okay, so the main structures in the cardiovascular system is the pump and the vessels, and then the blood flowing through those things. So the pump is your heart. We'll get into the heart later on. Just a heads up, though, there are parts of your heart that receive blood, and then parts of your heart that shove that blood out to different parts of your body. The left side moves blood to your body, and the right side of your heart actually moves blood that's received from the body into your lungs to get more oxygen. But we'll go into that later. The blood vessels, though, are the key thing we're going to go over today. And they are the tubes that go around your body, and the main three kinds. There's also some intermediate kinds, but the main three kinds we're going to go over are arteries, capillaries, and veins. They carry the blood to your body towards the cells. One of them, the capillaries, is the main dude that's actually interacting with the cell directly. And some of them, i.e. your arteries and veins, are the ones with smooth muscles to help push fluid through a little bit more efficiently. Okay? There's also a thing called valves or sphincters. So again, that one-way flow to make sure you don't get backflow of unwanted waste and stuff like that back to your organs. You want to maintain that flow that's constantly feeding cells and removing crap. And you don't want to ever to go backwards, so that's bad blood with waste and no nutrients return to a tissue that doesn't want it. So we kind of always want fresh blood to be brought to tissues and crappy blood to be removed from tissues. And one of the things that helps prevent backwash of crappy blood is called a valve, or also known as a sphincter. And it's just a one-way door, kind of like a one-way door inside a shop or restaurant that's just preventing you from going backwards. If you want to return, you have to go one way. You have no option to return the other way. You have to go through a different mechanisms to come back, right? So one-way door. All right. So it's found in the heart for sure, and it's found in some vessels, in particular your veins. Also some other ones, but your veins are the big player with valves and sphincters. Okay. So going into the function of those main three blood vessels, you have the arteries, whose main thing is to send blood away from the heart. So the easiest way to remember is A for away. So the arteries bring things away from the heart. For most of the time, most arteries are about bringing oxygenated blood from your lungs out of the heart and into the rest of your body. So for the most places, the blood is mostly oxygenated. There is one exception. There is a pair of arteries called the pulmonary arteries that take in blood into your heart that's returning to the heart and send it away into the lungs to get oxygen. That's the one exception, but the majority of arteries are about sending oxygenated blood to your body. Now, there's also something called arterioles. We'll talk about them later, but they're basically like like, think of them as those off ramps to take blood from the arteries into the capillaries. The capillaries are really important because they're the thinnest blood vessels, smallest blood vessels that allow diffusion. And what they're going to do is they're going to allow anything from the blood to leave and leak into the cells, basically leave and travel into cells and receive material from cells back into the capillaries. The veins and arteries are too thick to receive anything or release anything. They're the freeway. The capillaries are the off-ramp to the cell. And then finally we have the veins. And the veins, their job is the opposite of the arteries. They're going to take the crappy blood and bring it back to the heart. Usually. But they're about bringing blood back to the heart. For most of your body, the blood that's returning to your heart is the blood that doesn't have oxygen anymore. So deoxygenated means no oxygen. And it's trying to come back to the heart so it can go to your lungs to get oxygen. There's one exception. The blood leaving your lungs and going back to the heart is oxygenated. Okay? That's called the pulmonary veins. We'll talk about that later. But most of the time, arteries will bring oxygenated blood to the body, and veins will bring deoxygenated blood back to the heart and then the lungs. Okay, so you don't have to draw them out, but you should write this flow chart. So in terms of blood and blood flow, generally speaking from your heart, it goes into an artery, then travels through an off-ramp in the arterioles, then goes to the capillary where exchange occurs between the cells for whatever you need, getting new oxygen, removing the oxygen, releasing nutrients, getting nutrients, whatever it is. Then as it circulates back to your heart eventually, because ultimately all your blood has to come back to your heart to get oxygen from the lungs, it's going to travel through an on-ramp. So venules are the on-ramp into the vein. And then the veins are going to bring that blood back to the heart so it can get whatever it needs. Okay? So just kind of write this flow chart. There's also two kinds of circulation of blood from the heart to the lungs to get oxygen, and circulation of blood from the heart into the body to take that oxygen and give it out to the body tissues. But we'll talk about that later in CN 40. All right, so for just today, we're going to go over arteries and veins only, and we'll hold off on capillaries until the next part 2. So arteries in general are about, it's the heart shoving blood out of the heart into the body. So it's the part of your blood vessels that receive the most high pressure shoving of stuff. So basically all the fluid that's being pumped out of the heart goes directly through the arteries first. So the arteries have to take in a lot of pressure. So all their flow is based on the shoving and pushing pressure from the pumping of blood in your heart. So it doesn't have any worry about backwash because the flow is too strong. Imagine having to swim in a river that's rushing at you at 40 miles per hour. You can't do it. You're just going to have to flow however the river flows. It's pushing at you too hard. Okay? Because there's so much pressure being shoved through it, it has to have thick walls to handle all that pressure. So it provides strength for that high pressure pumping, and it's got a little bit narrow diameter when at rest. It oftentimes, because it's got so much muscle in it, it kind of like a rubber band, it snaps back into place in order to, so it looks at rest smaller than a vein, even though it has ability like a balloon to expand into really large sizes. So artery versus vein, okay? Artery versus vein under a microscope. So the big things with the arteries, it's got the thickest layer of muscle because it's dealing with the most force and shoving of materials through your body. And because there's so much pressure, there needs to be protective allowance to allow for expansion so it doesn't pop. So you have a lot of elastic tissue, specifically dense elastic tissues, if you guys remember that at all from earlier in the year, I think Unit 2 when we're talking about tissues, or Unit 3. And that recoil allows you to maintain a decent amount of pressure in your blood vessels, even when your heart is relaxed. There's always enough force in your blood vessel, in the arteries, to always constantly push the blood towards your body tissues. Okay? And again, this is a classic picture of the dense elastic tissue that's found in arteries and to a much lower degree found in your veins. Because you notice here, this is where blood flow is done. It's also called blood flow is done here. It's also known as a lumen. And because blood is going through the inside, you'll notice these walls are way too thick. There's no way blood can be transmitted to the rest of your tissues. So until this blood, which is speeding through the highway of your arteries, gets to the capillaries, the side street, you can't deliver anything in the bloodstream into the tissues that need it. Sort of like the UPS truck on the freeway can't get that package to your house. They're not going to throw something from the freeway and hit your house. That's not possible. So going back to this image of your blood vessel flow, I'm just recalling that you're using your arteries to send blood directly from your heart. So blood is leaving your heart, and then it's entering the arteries as a high-speed freeway that's to your house. And then the arterioles are acting as what's basically working as an off-ramp for your blood flow. So your blood is going to take an off-ramp from your high-speed arteries, and it's fast, right? So if you watch a horror movie or an action movie, you probably know that if you cut your artery, blood will gush out. All right, and that's actually it can happen. Your veins, if you accidentally get that damage, it will leak blood, and a large amount of blood, but at a much slower rate. It will not gush, okay? Because it doesn't have that high speed pressure of the heart. It's just real fast, okay? Now your capillaries are real thin, and they're going to be your delivery. They're going to be where you get deliveries, right? And then as blood or as waste, so you get your delivery, and now your mailman needs to pick up stuff again, and it might have the person who did the delivery might have noticed you have waste that you need to get rid of or something you need to be delivered elsewhere. So it's going to return back to the circulatory system through your vein, okay? But your vein, again, is a freeway, so you can't go directly from your house onto a freeway. You have to go onto an on-ramp, which is what your venules act as. So your venules are your on-ramp, which is going to allow back the blood flow and any materials from your tissues to get into your blood through the capillaries, then onto the on-ramp. Then it can then enter your veins, which is, again, your freeway, but the freeway back to the dump site or wherever it needs to go back to. And from the vein, it can return back to the heart. Okay, so that's a big idea. So just as a quick recap of the blood vessels, I mentioned earlier that the arteries and vein and capillaries are very different because of their functions. And the artery in particular, because it has the highest pressure and it involves the most the highest amount of blood flow, it has to be really highly regulated and have the ability to withstand a lot of force. So it's the blood vessel with the thickest cell with the thickest walls around the edges of the blood vessel. And in addition to that, its middle layer has a lot thicker amount of muscle compared to a vein. And it also has a lot more elastic because, again, that pressure of stuff going through it would make it shatter if it was too stiff. So that elastic gives it the ability to bounce back to maintain blood pressure and also handle a large amount of volume flowing through it real quick. The vein, on the other hand, tends to have a thinner wall, as you can see in this picture here, and it can handle a lot of volume, but the blood, by the time it's passing through the vein, it's much further away from the heart, which is the source of all that pressure, that it doesn't have as much blood flow going through it as quickly, so it doesn't need as much reinforcement. Okay? And just as a quick recap of the scale, and we'll go back to this picture later, this is actually over here in this picture, you can see it's like a illustrated representation, but here that's a capillary. Over here, this represents an artery, including the 3 layers of the artery. And then over here, let me find it. Here represents the vein and then the layers of the vein. So let's cover what the function of the vein is and the unique structures in the vein as they compare to the artery. And this is where you're going to start writing down new notes onto your last note sheet. So again, after we go through the arteries, we're going to go through the capillaries, but the capillaries is a little bit complicated, so I'm going to cover the capillaries a little bit later. But after we go through the capillaries for exchange of materials, all your deoxygenated blood, all the other blood that you want to circulate back to the heart is going to come back and return to the heart from the vein. So it has the least amount of pressure, but it is still flowing a significant amount of volume of blood back to the heart. So the veins, their structure allows them to do this better. Or maybe the lack of materials they have compared to the artery reflects more of its function compared to the artery. Okay, so the artery has that much thicker muscle wall, but on the other hand, for the vein, because it's returning, generally speaking, deoxygenated blood back to the heart, it's also going to have a lot lower pressure because it's so far away from the source of all the movement, the pumping of the heart, that it needs assistance through the skeletal muscles to help squeeze that blood back towards the heart. So what ends up happening is when you move around, when you walk around, your muscles push on your veins, and that creates a pushing pressure that forces the blood to squeeze through your vein. Now, it doesn't go backwards. It only moves forwards towards the heart because of the help of valves. Valves are one-way doors. So when you push something, it will not flow backwards. It can only flow the direction that you allow it. And if it goes backwards, it hits a blocking wall that won't let it go backwards. Generally speaking, if you get older, or if you know someone who's older, whose valve in their heart is no longer working, or if they have a valve that's no longer working in their arm or leg or something, it often needs to be repaired, or they will get vein damage, because what happens is when the valve isn't blocking the blood from going backwards, the blood moves backwards and creates kind of a balloon effect, and that can really damage a blood vessels, and that's how you get like varicose veins or even heart problems. Okay, so for example, my mom had to get her mitral valve repaired, which is a major valve inside her heart. Okay, so the vein compared to the artery is much thinner, and because it's much thinner, it doesn't need as much stuff, and because it doesn't have as much muscle holding it tight, it ends up allowing it to have a wider diameter to allow that blood flow to go through it. And that means even though there's not as much force pushing stuff through it, it can still get a lot of blood to go through it just because the tube is so big, right? So maybe someone's not blowing through that straw, but if the straw's tube, like a boba straw, is really huge, even if you just drop liquid, it's going to flow through really easily just because the tube is so large. Now, because it still has the same layers as the artery, except those layers aren't as dynamic. They have the muscle layer in particular has much less muscle and also much less elastic tissues in those layers. But to maintain the flow, because they don't have as much pressure going through them, they're going to have those valves. So as a result, there's going to be that low pressure and lower blood flow speed, though still a decent amount of blood flow volume is going to go through them, but not at the same speed as it would go through a heart. So if you get a vein damage, you will lose a lot of blood, but not at the speed that you would if you damaged an artery. Like an artery, you can bleed out and get a really dangerous drop in your blood flow within minutes, versus a vein. You have time to go to the hospital and get it sewed back together and get it repaired and all that. Okay, so let's go into the capillaries. Again, the capillaries is the big player here, because remember, we got that oxygenated blood leaving the heart It's going through the artery, and then it passes through the off-ramp into the capillaries. And the capillaries is where it has the opportunity for exchange. This is where your body gets its oxygen. So the capillaries in your muscles are the ones feeding your muscles the oxygen. In fact, your heart itself, the outside of your heart, has its own bed of capillaries to feed the heart muscle so it gets blood as well. Because your heart, while it helps push blood through your body, it also needs to be fed energy and oxygen through capillaries. So this is very key. Your capillaries will also interact with your lungs because you need exchange in your lungs to bring in oxygen and remove CO2. So again, any part where your blood needs to exchange something, whether it's delivering oxygen to your body or removing CO2 from that tissue, or going to the lungs and getting oxygen into the blood, it's going to do it through a capillary. Now, the capillaries are actually not single anytime you find them in the body. They're usually woven into a spidery network that we call capillary beds. Okay, so that's why you kind of see this weave going through. I'll show you in the next picture. It's really, I think I showed you in a picture on the last notes, but it looks really funky. All right, but because the tubes are so tiny, like if you've ever seen one of those coffee stirrer straws, they're super thin, they're like 2 millimeters thick. You can barely force any air or liquid through them because they're so small, because the tube is so tiny compared to like a normal tube. Okay, so even if the pressure is strong in the capillary, the flow is always going to be slow because the tubes are so thin, and it's going to allow a lot of diffusion and movement and exchange of materials because those tubes are so thin that blood flow is slowed down significantly to provide more time and area and space for all that exchange to happen. So all those little spidery strands here, that's capillaries. Those are the things that are helping to flow and allow exchange of materials between your blood and your body. And you actually notice here the fingertips have the most blood flow in your hands, or the highest density of blood flow in your hands, because that has a lot of nerves that need to be fed, so your fingertips can be more sensitive to touch. Okay, so your capillaries compared to your veins and arteries, because they're meant for exchange, they have to be incredibly thin. They're actually so thin, they're only 1 cell layer thick, and they only consist of the inner cell layer that's found in veins and arteries. They only have that 1 cell layer to allow for blood flow and exchange. It's called the endothelium, which is also known as the tunica interna, which I'll show you on a later slide. And because it lacks all those extra layers, there's no muscle tissue. There's no elastic tissue. It's just meant there for flow and exchange between your interstitial fluids and your blood. And if you forgot what interstitial fluid means, it means the fluid surrounding your cells. Okay, so the fluid around your cells is what's allowing the cells to grab stuff and remove stuff. So these are kind of a quick image of the artery, vein, and capillary. And again, this capillary is not to scale. The capillary is much smaller compared to to the artery and vein. I'm going to show you that picture again, right? This is my capillary. It's very, very small compared to my artery and vein to allow for that exchange. And it's so thin compared to the other two. I'll erase that picture so you can see how thin that layer is. That concludes the lesson. These are the takeaways for the lecture today. Bye.